Alright guys, hey there, hope you're all doing well today. I just have a few things I want to talk about. Firstly, I'm going to do kind of like a little daily debrief of the markets. And as you can see by the thumbnail, I'm going to be talking a lot about what sectors benefited and some of the reasons why they went up. And like I mentioned by the thumbnail, that's mainly going to be memory stocks, okay? I have a lot to talk about memory stocks, why I think they can still go up over this next 6 months to 12 months, I think there's going to be a lot of great things happening currently that can benefit memory stocks like Micron, and even this whole ETF DRAM that I really want to talk about. I believe it came out April 2nd, as well as SanDisk. There's a big NAND shortage that everyone's kind of talking about it, but I think it's going to be, a lot worse than, people may be anticipating. So I'd love to crunch the numbers with you guys and get into that in a little bit. But before we start, like I mentioned yesterday, I made a really good call on my video, my first ever video, actually. Kind of talking about how tech will most likely do really well today, continue to rise past expectations, especially CPU and hardware companies. Shout out to the 9 people who watched my video. I probably know all 9 of them, but you know what? We all start somewhere. Shout out to the 3 subscribers too. Probably know all 3 of them. One of them's myself. I'm not going to sit here and lie. Anyways, about my call, I made a great call on AMD. So if you watched that video, kudos to you because, you probably made some good coin on AMD. And I think, in my opinion, I know I said in the last video that I had a price target on them by the end of the year at 350. I believe we can see 400, maybe even 500 by the end of the year. I'm going to get into detail in a little bit. There's so many videos and so many ideas I have that I want to, talk to you guys about. Another one just came to my mind about the CPU shortage. Everyone's kind of talking about it. It's all over the headlines, but not a lot of people, like retail investors, know about it. But we're seeing smart money slowly move into it. That's why it's had this $100 rise. And I do, think it can have an even bigger rise by the end of the year. Same with ARM as well. Another great stock that did good today was Microsoft. Kind of made a good call on that. It's up about $9 on the day today. They're down about 5 just because, their peers, IBM and the, software industry, ServiceNow, CRM, they all reported today. I haven't looked at the numbers. I know ServiceNow beat and raised, but they still went down. I think it's kind of bad to compare those companies to Microsoft just because those are strictly, SaaS companies. Although Microsoft has that as their business, their main business is their Azure and the, hyperscaling. So I think it's kind of not good to compare them. But I'd love to also do another video right before the earnings, just in case any of you guys are investing in them, just like me. Just to keep you guys up to date on everything you should be looking out for in terms of like numbers and projections for their company. Just going into earnings, what the street is actually pricing in for it. But besides hardware having a huge run up today, like I mentioned, like, oh my God, look at AMD, look at DRAM, all the RAM companies, NAND going crazy today. But besides those hardware companies, primarily rising due to the shift towards, inference and agentic AI instead of AI training. We saw those companies just make a huge jump to the upside, which is really beautiful to see. Instead of that, kind of building off of these 2 lucky guys right here, I really want to talk about my current favorite subsector in the market to invest in for the next 6 to 18 months. And I really want to bring this to your table, guys, because I think this is really awesome to talk about. It's going to be the memory sector, okay? Primarily with HBM. Micron is a huge company. I'm going to be talking about SK Hynix, although we can't trade that. We do get exposure to them in the DRAM ETF. So anything I say, you guys can definitely just go ahead, invest in the DRAM. And I just want to make a disclosure here. This is not financial advice. This is not a solicitation by any means necessary. And this is not personalized financial advice. How can it be? I do not know your personal situation. This is just my opinion. I've gone with information after researching for many, many hours, making an informed opinion, just bringing it to you guys' table. Primarily on the topic today, we're going to be discussing HBM. So high bandwidth memory, mainly related to, SK Hynix, Samsung will mention briefly, and then Micron, as well as NAND and SSD technology. So if we look closely at today, SanDisk had a huge, crazy price action, as well as Micron. Let me just, matter of fact, pull up Micron stocks. Sorry, AMD, we're going to get rid of you for a second. Looking at Micron here, it had a $38 increase, all right? Now, some of you may be wondering why that is, how that happened, and how much higher can they go. I believe a lot higher. And over the time horizon I gave, which is 6 to 18 months, I think it can continue to rise, guys. I'm so serious. I believe Micron can hit $600. I think SanDisk can maybe even double or go up 50% from here. The sky's really the limit for these companies. This bottleneck that no one's, really kind of saying how bad it actually can be. And I'll explain why that is. All right. So let's start off with Micron and SanDisk today. So this sector the NAND sector, memory sector has really been riding a structural AI memory thesis. All right. So essentially what that means is that because of the HBM supply constraint, which has caused SanDisk to go up 280% in 2026 and just under 3,000% in the past year. Micron up 60% year to date and just under 600% over the past year per Yahoo Finance. Just to put this in perspective, how much these products are in demand. One single NVIDIA Rubin super chip now requires 288 gigabytes of HBM4, which is a staggering increase from just 2 years ago, which really reinforces my thesis on memory and the demand for this product and how it is only going to increase, because as compute gets stronger, which is these companies, they're not slowing down. They're going to only get stronger from here. They are only planning on, making better products, better compute, and the switch over to agentic AI and inference. What does it require? Less compute, but higher amounts of HBM and memory. So that's something that's going to be very interesting. I'd love to talk about that in another video with agentic AI, just kind of solidifying that. But guys, just understand the switch over to inference is going to be very, very big, and I don't want any of you to get caught with your pants down, missing out on such a beautiful opportunity to build generational wealth, okay? I also want to talk about how SanDisk recently just joined the NASDAQ 100, or in other words, the triple Qs, which we will go check out at them. I believe as well the Qs can continue to rise. Wow, 655, that's really crazy. Don't mind the chart, guys. I'm a little unorganized here, but, wow, 655, that's a really crazy price action. Anyways, SanDisk recently just got added to them, and Wells Fargo raised the price target from $675 on SanDisk to $975. This is from Robinhood, getting my sources from there. As we know, there was a very brief pullback in April for all memory stocks. So if we zoom out here, go to the daily, we can see in the beginning of April, there was a slight, kind of pullback. Actually, a little bit late March, early April, kind of brought Micron down to about 320, hovering around this area of 360. This was mainly caused because, when Google's TurboQuant, just one of Google's things, they researched, raised concerns that more efficient AI models could actually reduce memory chip demand, okay? Which is causing SK Hynix, which is the leader in HBM currently in the world. They're a Korean company. So if you haven't heard of them, they're a Korean company. They're not on the NASDAQ. And Samsung, we all know Samsung, causing both those companies to fall 6% and 5% nearly, respectively. That's quoted from CNBC. So the sector has since recovered. As we can tell, it's at all-time highs because the market concluded, in my opinion, rightfully so, that more efficient AI actually drives more total adoption of HBM. So more memory demand will continue to rise. The demand for memory will not slow down and will continue to rise. Now, something I really want to talk about, there's a really important nuance here, okay? Very important nuance that didn't get covered there. Even though Micron and SK Hynix and Samsung have all pledged to ramp up production, these companies, obviously, it'll be foolish for them not to ramp up production. These guys are all trying to ramp up their production, okay, to be able to make as much money as possible, and meet the demand. That doesn't mean they can just flip a switch and add capacity. Just because they can increase the supply doesn't mean they can add capacity. I'll explain what that means. They can reallocate, meaning they can shift HBM wafers away from making, basic generic DRAM and pushing them towards HBM production, okay? Which is exactly what all three of these mega giants are doing right now to meet the demand. But there is a hard physical limit to actually how much faster they can do this, and that's where the capacity constraints actually come in, which is what I want to talk about here. So let me explain kind of what I mean by that. It takes roughly 2 to 3 years to build a fully functioning fabrication facility and ramp it to meaningful output. You don't just, build a building. You have to install the clean room, hook up the utilities, qualify the equipment, and then go through customer qualification runs before you can actually ship the product at sale, essentially, okay? Now, like I mentioned, they are all planning to, increase their capacity at some point. They're already increasing their supply, switching production from DRAM over to HBM. That won't quite help them that will help them, but not as much as we may think. What will help them is increasing capacity, but that will not help them in the near term. Thus, the reason why I believe this can really prolong into 2028 if the demand is increasing as much as I think it will. Okay, now let's look at the numbers here. Let's look at the timeline Micron has for this facility. So you may be wondering, Stocks with Noah, what is this on screen here? This is a little thing from Micron's press release posted on January 26, 2026. Okay? This was basically regarding a advanced packaging facility regarding HBM wafer in Singapore that they are building, okay? So they broke ground in early 2025. I'm just summarizing this article for you guys. It's pretty long, so it's a little tedious rather, but they broke ground. They started building it in early 2025, and they believe that initial operations from this building will be produced in mid 2026. You may be like, no, that's pretty soon. Let me explain. It states in this article that only meaningful HBI supply contribution will be given in mid 2027, in the calendar year of 2027. So what does that mean? Even though they are initially starting operations in 2026, they won't notice any sort of capacity shifts in the supply market for HBM wafers until mid 2027, and that's for one of their facilities. Okay, they have another one in Singapore, I believe, another advanced wafer fab. This is a separate project announced once again in January 2026. They're investing $24 billion into this. It's going to come out. The first output is going to be in 2028, okay? And this is a NAND wafer fab, not an HBM one. Sorry, so I think I might have said HBM. This is a NAND one, not HBM. So this actually does support the case for SanDisk as well. They have another one coming out in Idaho. This is, I believe, their biggest one. Someone in the comments, please fact check me on that. But it's coming out in Idaho. It's Fab 1. It's called the ID1. That's the code name for it. The first wafer output is going to be mid-2027, same one as the one before. But full operations won't take place until 2028. Okay, so they got some cool videos on here. Won't really play them, but you can kind of see it. They're building it right now. It's going to be operational in the end of 2028. They're also building another Idaho Fab 2. They're calling this one ID2. Construction 2026. Operational end of 2028. So what is the theme here? You start building in 2026, 2025, 2 years. It's going to be fully operational, and at that midpoint, you'll start to see operations beginning. But the nuance here is that you won't see any sort of major supply differences to HBM until 2028, guys. 2028, okay? All these analysts are pricing in the fact that it's going to be, bottlenecked until 2027 until the supply starts to catch up. I'm not saying it's only going to be the exact same, capacity until then. I'd be delusional to say that. I just think the demand for the products are going to be so vast because agentic AI is going to call for it. All these new products, for instance, AMD is releasing new chips that are going to be 50% more RAM requirements. All these TPUs that Google's making with Marvell, which is what I'll talk about in another video as well. Marvell is going to be a wonderful buy. They partnered with Google. They're making TPUs that are going to be required strictly for inference. We know what TPUs are. Tensor processing units, kind of similar to like the Trainium that Amazon offers. And they're built strictly for, training these AI bots. Google is now switching, along with the help of Marvell Tech, to build TPUs strictly for inference and agentic AI. And what do they need? More memory. So this demand for memory is only going to skyrocket, and it's going to be a humongous bottleneck. Now, I'd be foolish to only talk about Micron. So let's talk about SK Hynix as well as Samsung, okay? So, SK Hynix, they are making a fabricator, the M15X fab in South Korea. They're investing $14.6 billion into it. The first clean room actually opened in October 2025, okay? And they had DRAM production for HBM4, which is the newest model currently, which was pulled forward from June to February 2026, 4 months earlier, so they actually pulled it forward. The initial capacity was going to be 10,000 wafers per month. The target capacity in 2027 is 55 to 60,000 wafers per month. So that's a target capacity in, once again, mid-2027, okay? And this is only one fabricator that they're building, okay? 10,000 wafers per month is a good starting point, but it's nowhere near maximum capacity. It is about 5 times less than what they are trying to get to. So once again, it's another capacity constraint with their big fab in South Korea, the biggest investment they're making there. The next one, they have another one in South Korea they're building, the P&T7 Advanced Packaging Fab. This construction begins in April 2026. So this month, full operations will begin end of 2027. And HBM, it's going to be an HBM-focused packaging center, once again. And then they have another one, the Yongin Semiconductor Cluster. This is going to be a very long-term one SK Hynix is making. The first clean room, once again, is going to be created in February 2027. So it won't be done by maybe 2030, 2029. So that one is just basically a write-off. The last two are essentially write-offs. So the only one that is really making meaningful supply capacity changes is going to be Micron. So that could be very interesting for Micron stock. I'd love you guys to take that into consideration. That being said, SK Hynix is projecting high bandwidth memory to grow at 33% compounded annually from 2025 to 2030. And like Micron, their 2026 high bandwidth memory is already spoken for. I don't have access to this article. My friend told me that there was an article from Morgan Stanley. One of you guys may have to fact check me on this one, but I'm 99% sure that it is real. Morgan Stanley came out and was talking about how their projections for 2027 is that SK Hynix will have about a revenue of $200 billion, which is insane in the year 2027. When all these analysts are concluding that maybe the supply will be able to catch up to demand. The demand will always be there, but their whole thesis is that the supply will be able to catch up. There won't be a bottleneck in 2027. Then why are they projected to make so much money, and why is only one company projected to make it? Now, I'd also love to come here and search up, the HBM market share split for you guys, just to show you. For instance, this one right here. This is in quarter one 2025. I imagine it's a little different slightly now. SK Hynix has 36%, and they are going to make $200 billion. Okay, Micron was not a big player in HBM a little bit before. It was obviously SK Hynix and Samsung, but now they are increasing their supply, getting more contracts with companies, and now they're going to be gaining a lot more market share. So who's to say that these other companies won't make near or at that essentially? Now I want to talk about Samsung as well. A very interesting one there too. Samsung actually has more total DRAM capacity than SK Hynix. That's something that's not really known about too much. Even though everyone says that SK Hynix is the biggest, Samsung actually has more capacity in them. Roughly 170,000 wafers per month versus SK Hynix is 160,000. But there is nuance to this, okay? Samsung is behind on HB4M qualifications for NVIDIA. They were claimed the number one spot in total DRAM revenue in Q4 2025, but in the HBM specific category, SK Hynix still leads, all right? So let's not get that twisted. SK Hynix is still the king in this space, but because they're on the Korean Stock Exchange, we can't really invest in them. So like I mentioned with DRAM, we get great exposure to them. I can pull up a picture of their holdings right here, actually. Let me just go back. DRAM holdings, 27, 26% SK Hynix, and then 24% Micron, 24 Samsung. So if we're doing just basic math, that's just over or just at 75%, just these three right here. And then obviously 15 to 26% cash. That could be a concern, but obviously this ETF just came out on April 6th, which is IPO'd April 6th, right? So, they're going to probably turn that cash into more investments in these companies. I don't blame them. Maybe waiting for a correct entry point, whatever. Anyways, though, that is great for DRAM and great for the market. But like I said, SK Hynix still leads. But Samsung is rushing their mass production in HBM4 in 2026 to try their best to close that gap. So Samsung is also building in Texas with risk production targeted for 2026, but that's still at a very early stage. Once again, Samsung is trying to build in Texas, but that won't be done until around 2028, 2029. So there is also a huge, once again, capacity constraint for all three of these major companies. The best one seems to be Micron. They seems to be the one that's expanding the most. But essentially, my whole point with this whole video here is to just bring attention to the three memory giants and how they are all pledging massive capacity expansions. And those expansions are real, but I am not personally convinced that these investments will resolve the bottleneck slated by investors to continue into 2027. I am not delusional, or I try my best not to be too delusional, but I know you can't be too bullish and too crazy on this. I understand that RAM is commoditized. It is cyclical, and it goes through cycles of demand. It goes through cycles of trough. It goes through cycles of oversupply, all that kind of stuff, all that goodness. This has happened many times before in the history of memory and HBM, and I know that one day supply will match demand and cycle lower. That's just how it goes. It's how it's always happened historically. But I believe that day is much farther out than most people anticipate, kind of from the main reasons I specified earlier. I do believe, structurally, this cycle and this, turn up for HBM is similar to every single, rise and fall we've seen in prices for these RAM companies ever. I think it's structurally the same. Fundamentally, it's different, rather. We've never seen demand for this crazy, and we've never seen, need and potential uses for RAM, like agentic AI, and for this AI build out ever. We've never seen anything like this. So that's why I think it's fundamentally different. Thus, kind of backing my thesis that it can continue for longer and raise prices on these companies. And I think investors agree with me. I really think they do. Another thing I want to talk about is mainly 5 more issues. The first one is going to be the silicon intensity problem. Making high bandwidth memory uses 3 times more silicon per gigabyte than regular DRAM. And that ratio gets worse with new generation, the HBM4, HBM4E, and the projected HBM5. So even if wafer output grows, so even if capacity continues, HBM output grows more slowly. So it doesn't necessarily matter how much potassium. Sorry, what am I talking about? I just drank potassium water, coconut water. I said potassium water. I just drank coconut water. I don't know why I'm saying that. Capacity, I meant to say. Even if HBM grows, the capacity continues for these wafers. That's all they calculate with, how many wafers they're able to produce. And that can get translated into high bandwidth memory. But as the generations get better and more advanced, it's less per wafer, So this kind of leads me into my next issue, which is the capacity timelines are kind of lumpy. They're kind of very far out. Most of the capacity I just listed lands in 28, 27, not 2026. So not this year. That means in 2026, it's effectively a capacity locked year where demand keeps ramping, but supply is fixed. My next issue I want to talk about is that demand is accelerating, not plateauing. So hyperscaler capex for 2026 is projected at $800 billion for this AI build out. Not even really taking into account the future shift to agentic AI, guys. I cannot stress this enough. And that's $800 billion is up from another $200 billion just a few years ago. Every NVIDIA chip, every AMD MI350, every Google TPU, every Microsoft chip, every OpenAI chip needs HBM, guys. Every single one of them needs it. My fourth issue is that the high bandwidth market is projected to grow from 35 billion to 100 billion by 2028. So this isn't really an issue. This is actually a benefit on my side for my thesis at a 40% compounded annual growth rate. So just really let that sink in. That's the demand side, okay? The supply side grows at maybe 20 to 25% per year at best. At best. And that's probably going to be a lot slower for this year projected. My fifth issue with this is that memory is only one of the semiconductor subsectors where 3 companies control roughly 30 or 95% of the market. So many of you may not know, but like I said in that little split I showed you earlier of the 3 companies, the main holders that hold 95% of the market share are going to be, like I mentioned, Micron, okay, Samsung, and SK Hynix. They hold 95% of the markets. And it's an oligopoly with sold out order books, and they will not slash prices. Why would they? There's no reason for them to, and they obviously don't have the pricing power because it is commoditized, but those prices will not get slashed. And they do kind of have some pricing power sense in the sense that they control the supply, right? So when you put all that together with capacity constraints that physically can't be resolved before 2027, the silicon intensity getting worse, demand accelerating, and an oligopoly structure, this is not your typical memory cycle like I mentioned. It may be the same structurally, but it's very different fundamentally. The normal 12 to 18 month cycle downturn that everyone is waiting for, I think it gets pushed out to 2028. Honestly, guys, maybe even later. I really would not be surprised, I would not be surprised if it gets pushed out even later. But essentially, my final point here is that because of these constraints that we're seeing and the increasing demand for high bandwidth memory, is just seeming to increase exponentially into 2027, there is no reason for any of us to believe that the AI boom and demand for these products will go away anytime soon. This all leads back to one thing, however, that I mentioned briefly in my last video and a little earlier. As the world is slowly moving towards agentic AI and inference, you don't need more compute capacity, you need more memory. AMD's latest chips contain 50% more memory capacity requirements. Keeping all this in mind and tying it all back to the beginning, this is why we see the hardware boom from CPUs in the next 6 months starting in June when SpaceX IPOs. That's going to be a huge catalyst, and I'd love to talk about that in a little bit. These memory companies will boom to new levels. Analysts are already pricing this in, citing a $600 stock price on Micron. I'd love to pull that up here, but some analysts are citing a $600 price target. You know, a lot of them are saying, oh, one even has 1,000, 553, 800, 600. Wow, this is that is insanity. I did not realize it was that high, $1,000 price target. But yeah, they're really citing it really high from Micron specifically, and I imagine for SK Hynix and the entirety of the HBM sector, guys. I wouldn't be surprised if this really continues to go higher. All right, everyone. That is it for today. Thank you so much for tuning in. You know what? Shout out to the 9 people that watched my video. I know I gave you guys a shout out earlier, but really shout out to you guys. It really means a lot. You know, stay tuned for more content regarding macroeconomic stocks, you know, deep dives on everything, earnings reports, all that kind of stuff. I just love this stuff, so I'd love to keep talking. Please mention down below in the comment section whatever you guys want me to talk about. If there's anything that crosses your mind, send me a comment. I read it. I have no subscribers right now. I can read every comment. I can get to it. Also, stay tuned for my SanDisk deep dive coming out sometime this week. I will also be covering Microsoft stock before earnings, so stay tuned for that one as well. Anyways, guys, make sure you all stay safe, be smart, and have a great rest of your day, guys. Take care and God bless.